I was sitting at the edge of my bed scrolling through my phone when the door burst open and my sister stormed in with shaking hands. And before I could even breathe, she pulled out a gun, pointed it straight at me and hissed, "Get up! Leave! Now! Don't say a word to Mom and Dad." My blood ran cold and every nerve in my body froze because this wasn't a prank. Her eyes were wild and her finger trembled dangerously close to the trigger, and all I could think was, how in the world did we get here? Two sisters in the same house, and she was ready to push me out at gunpoint. 5 minutes earlier, I had been replaying a conversation in my head, the one where she accused me of ruining her life because I told our parents about her hidden debt, the gambling apps she had been using behind everyone's back, and how she was stealing money out of Mom's purse to cover her losses. I had thought I was protecting her, maybe even saving her from herself, but instead she decided I was the enemy, the one who betrayed her secret, and now the barrel of a handgun was aimed at my chest. I remember the smell of her perfume mixed with the metallic tang of fear rising in my throat, the sound of my phone hitting the floor as I lifted my hands slowly in surrender, whispering that I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to call. For help, I just wanted her to calm down. But she only narrowed her eyes and repeated the words like they were a sentence carved in stone. "Leave. Don't tell them. Don't come back." And in that moment, something shifted inside me, because I realized this wasn't just about anger or debt. This was about years of resentment, all the times she claimed I was the favorite, the perfect one, the one who always got away with everything, while she was left drowning. I swallowed hard and forced myself to stand, my legs shaking so badly I thought they would give out. And as I moved toward the door, I caught sight of our family photo on the dresser, both of us smiling with our arms around each other just 2 summers ago, and the image seared into my mind because I knew that girl beside me wasn't the same person pointing a weapon at me now. She shoved the gun closer as if to remind me that hesitation wasn't an option, and I pushed past her, my heartbeat thundering so loudly it drowned out every other sound in the house. I stumbled down the hallway, half expecting our parents to come out of their room and see this madness. But the house was silent, oblivious, as though I was being erased without anyone noticing. By the time I reached the front door, I was gasping for air, clutching the handle like it was the only thing keeping me alive. And when I turned back, I saw her still standing there at the top of the stairs, gun lowered, but her face twisted in something between rage and grief. She didn't cry, she didn't yell, she just mouthed the words again, "Don't come back." And it hit me that maybe she wasn't just threatening me. Maybe she truly wanted me gone from her world forever. I stepped outside into the night, the cool air striking my skin like a slap. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't just run back inside and tell my parents, because if she was desperate enough to aim a gun at me, she was desperate enough to turn it on them if she thought her secret was about to explode. I walked fast, then faster, until I was down the block, my phone still abandoned on the bedroom carpet, my entire life suddenly cut off in one brutal moment. The streetlights flickered above me, and I asked myself what would happen next. Where would I go? How would I survive this betrayal? And most of all, how do you protect parents from their own daughter when she's holding more than just secrets in her hands? I kept walking until I reached the gas station at the corner, its buzzing neon lights washing over me in pale blue and red. And for the first time since leaving the house, I let myself lean against the cold brick wall and breathe. My sister still had my phone, and worse, all the evidence of what she had been doing. Screenshots of bank withdrawals, emails from loan companies, and the messages where she begged me not to tell Mom and Dad because they'd never look at her the same again. She thought I had ruined her life by speaking up, but what she didn't know was that I had only told them part of the truth, the safer part, the drinking and the late-night absences, but not the $20,000 she owed to men who didn't take excuses. I had promised myself I'd handle that quietly, maybe find a lawyer, maybe talk to the police, but instead I was standing here with nothing but the clothes on my back and the echo of her voice in my head, threatening me into silence. I slipped into the restroom to splash water on my face, and when I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw someone standing at a crossroads. If I ran away like she demanded, she'd bury herself deeper until the day someone far worse than me came knocking at our parents' door. If I stayed and exposed her, she might drag all of us into the kind of danger you only read about in crime reports. And so, for the first time in my life, I made a decision. without caring about keeping the peace in the family. I would find help, real help, and if she thought pointing a gun at me was going to silence me, she had no idea what kind of resolve she had just lit inside me. I walked back out into the night air, pulled the hood of my jacket over my head, and headed straight toward the only place open 24 hours where I could ask for protection without anyone twisting my words, the police station. The officer at the front desk looked up from his paperwork as I walked in, eyes red from crying and hands still trembling, and I blurted out the words before I even sat down. My sister pointed a gun at me. She told me to leave and never come back. His pen froze mid-air, and within seconds 2 other officers appeared, guiding me gently into a small interview room with beige walls and a flickering overhead light that made everything feel even more unreal. They asked me to tell them everything, and for the first time I laid it all out. The gambling, the missing money, the threats, the moment she aimed the gun at my chest and whispered that order like it was a death sentence. I half expected them not to believe me, but when I mentioned the debts and the loan sharks, their expressions hardened, as if they knew exactly the kind of mess she was entangled in. One of them asked if my parents were in danger, and that question nearly broke me, because I realized how much they still lived in the dark, thinking their eldest daughter was just a little reckless, not spiraling into something that could destroy us all. They took my statement, promised they would send someone to the house immediately, and asked if I had somewhere safe to stay. I shook my head, and that was when the reality hit me. My whole world, my home, my family had been ripped out from under me in less than an hour, and now strangers in uniforms were the only ones I could lean on. I signed the paperwork with a shaking hand, and when they offered me a glass of water, I stared at the condensation dripping down the cup and thought about how my sister's hands had been shaking just as hard when she held that gun. Except hers were steady enough to make me believe she would pull the trigger if I didn't obey. They drove me back toward the neighborhood but stopped 2 blocks away from my house. Their headlights dimmed, and one of the officers explained they needed to approach quietly in case my sister still had the weapon. My stomach twisted into knots at the thought of what I might see when they went inside, my parents confused, terrified, or worse, and I clutched the seatbelt like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. From the back seat, I could see the faint glow of our living room window, the same window where we used to sit up late watching movies together as kids, and now it looked like a stage for a nightmare I couldn't escape. They told me to stay put, but I pressed my forehead to the glass, praying I wouldn't hear a gunshot. Minutes crawled by like hours until finally one officer returned, face tense but calm, and said they had spoken with my parents. My sister wasn't there. She had left right after I did, still carrying the gun, leaving nothing behind but chaos and questions. Relief and dread collided inside me. Relief that Mom and Dad were alive. Dread that she was out there somewhere with a weapon. And a grudge that had only grown deeper. They let me see my parents for a brief moment. Mom clutching me so hard I thought she might never let go. Dad pacing with his hands buried in his hair, demanding answers I didn't know how to give. The officers promised to search for her, to track her debts, to figure out who had put her in this corner. But as I stood in the hallway of my own home, I felt like a guest in a place that would never feel safe again. And in that moment, I knew the next steps weren't just about police reports or missing persons. They were about deciding whether I could ever let her back into my life after she tried to push me out of it forever, with a single whisper and the barrel of a gun. The next morning, I was sitting in a small office at the precinct, wrapped in a thin blanket they had given me, when an officer came in carrying a folder with my name on it and a look that told me things were about to get worse before they got better. He explained they had found traces of my sister's car near the river, abandoned, the glove compartment filled with overdue notices from payday lenders, and a burner phone still buzzing with threatening messages demanding repayment. My stomach churned as he read a few of them out loud, menacing promises about what would happen if she didn't pay up. And suddenly it was clear that the gun she pointed at me wasn't just about silencing me. It was her way of pushing me out of the blast zone she knew was closing in. I felt sick realizing that as much as she hated me in that moment, she might have been trying to protect me too, in her twisted, desperate way. My parents arrived shortly after, faces pale, Dad refusing to sit down, Mom gripping my arm like I might vanish again, and the three of us listened as the officers laid out the truth. She was in debt to people who didn't care about family ties, and until they found her, none of us were safe. It was like a curtain had finally been ripped open, exposing years of secrets we had all pretended not to see. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just sat there staring at the stack of evidence and thought about how quickly love can turn into a weapon, how betrayal can walk into your bedroom with shaking hands and cold metal, and how in one night my sister had become both my greatest enemy and the person I was most afraid of losing. That night, I couldn't sleep, even though they had placed me and my parents in a protective motel under watch, the kind with heavy curtains and a single buzzing lamp. Every creak of the hallway made me jump. Every car pulling into the lot sent a rush of fear through me, and I realized my sister's shadow was bigger than her presence. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. The detectives came by with updates, but all they had were dead ends. Security cameras catching her wandering near a convenience store, a bank card declined at an ATM, then nothing. It felt like she had dissolved into the city. I sat by the window with the glass of water still half full from earlier, staring at my reflection, wondering if she was thinking about me the way I was thinking about her. Did she regret pointing that gun at me, or was she somewhere convincing herself it was justified, that I had forced her hand? My parents tried to talk, but every conversation ended in silence, because how do you admit your daughter, your sister, is both a victim and a criminal? By dawn, I had made a choice. I couldn't just sit in a motel room waiting for news. I needed to reclaim control. So I gathered the notes I'd written, the list of her debts, the screenshots I had backed up months ago to a cloud drive, and I started putting it all together like a case file. If the law was going to catch her, they would need evidence, and I was done hiding the ugly truth for the sake of family pride. When the officer came for his morning check, I handed him the folder I had created overnight and said, "This is everything. If you want to stop her before someone else does, start here." He took it without a word, but the weight of it leaving, my hands felt like the first real act of survival I'd made since she walked into my room with that gun. 2 days later, the call came in the middle of breakfast, the knock on the motel door sharp enough to make Mom drop her coffee. An officer stepped inside, his radio crackling faintly, and said they had found her, alive, but not untouched. She'd been pulled over on the highway after swerving into another lane, the gun still in her car, along with a crumpled duffel bag stuffed with cash and casino receipts. When they showed me the photos later, I recognized the same red duffel she had carried to sleepovers when we were kids, back when it only held pajamas and makeup, and the sight of it stuffed with her downfall nearly broke me. They said she had resisted arrest at first, screaming about how I had ruined her life, but by the time they brought her in, she was sobbing uncontrollably, begging them not to call our parents. I didn't go to the station to see her. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed in the motel room staring at the beige wallpaper, listening to Mom cry behind the bathroom door and Dad curse under his breath, and I wondered if families were ever meant to survive betrayals this deep. Later that evening, a detective told me that thanks to the file I had given them, every screenshot, every detail, they had enough to connect her debts to larger fraud investigations. She wasn't just in trouble with us anymore. She was facing charges that could take years to unravel. And for the first time since that night in my bedroom, I let myself feel something other than fear. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was the grim recognition that this chapter wasn't ending soon, but at least I wasn't powerless anymore. My sister had tried to erase me from the story, but now my voice was the one writing it. The first hearing was scheduled within the week, and I remember sitting in the back of the courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap as my sister was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her eyes darting everywhere but toward me. She looked smaller, almost fragile, nothing, like the person who had pressed a gun to my chest and told me to disappear. The prosecutor laid out the evidence, her debts, the fraudulent accounts, the weapon, and though my parents sat rigid beside me, I could feel the weight of their heartbreak pressing against my skin. When the judge asked if there were any victim statements, I stood, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry through the room. I told them about that night, about the way she whispered those words like a curse, about how it felt to walk out of my own home not knowing if I'd ever be safe again. My sister finally looked at me then, her face twisted between anger and shame, and for a fleeting second I saw the girl she used to be, the one who shared secrets under the covers and promised we'd always have each other's backs. But promises don't survive loaded guns. The hearing was brief, the decision clear. She would remain in custody while the case unfolded. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt heavy but cleaner, like a storm had passed but left behind debris I'd have to pick through for years. And as the cameras of local reporters flashed around us, I realized that my revenge wasn't about ruining her. It was about refusing to let her silence me, about standing there and telling the truth even when it shredded what little family we had left. Weeks turned into months, and while my sister sat behind bars waiting for trial, I slowly began rebuilding the pieces of a life I hadn't chosen to shatter. Therapy became my anchor, a place where I could untangle the fear from the guilt, where I learned that protecting her had never been my responsibility, no matter how many times I'd played the role of her shadow guardian. My parents struggled. Mom visited her regularly, torn between love and betrayal, while Dad refused to step foot in the jail, saying he couldn't face the daughter who had aimed a gun at her own blood. As for me, I wrote letters I never sent, words I needed to say but couldn't put in her hands, because forgiveness isn't something you can mail with a stamp. I moved into a small apartment across town, filled it with secondhand furniture and quiet mornings, and for the first time I slept without waking to every creak of the floorboards. Sometimes at night I replayed her voice in my head, the whisper that started it all. Leave now, don't come back. And instead of fear, I felt clarity. She had tried to exile me from my own family, but in the end she was the one locked away, and I was the one walking free. And freedom, I realized, wasn't just the absence of her threats. It was the strength to choose my own peace, to build walls where boundaries had never existed, to breathe without the weight of her secrets pressing on my chest. The day of sentencing arrived like the closing of a book I had never wanted to read but had been forced to memorize line by line. I sat in the courtroom once again, my parents on either side of me, though the distance between all of us felt like miles. My mother clutched, a tissue so tightly it shredded in her palm, while my father stared forward with a face carved out of stone. When they brought my sister in, shackled at the wrists, she looked thinner, her once fiery presence reduced to something brittle and gray. The judge spoke about her choices, the debts, the weapon, the trail of destruction she had left in her wake. He spoke about accountability, about how families can fracture when one person drags everyone else into the undertow. And then he handed down the sentence. 7 years. 7 years where she would have no late-night casinos, no chance to borrow from purses or wave a gun at someone who loved her. 7 years where she would be forced to face herself without me there to clean up her mess. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I simply breathed. After the gavel came down, she turned her head toward me, eyes hollow but searching, as if waiting for me to stand up and say I'd still be there for her. But I stayed seated, hands folded neatly in my lap. Because the truth was, I had already given her my loyalty, my silence, my protection, and she had taken every piece of it and weaponized it against me. I owed her nothing more. Life after the trial wasn't some sudden sunrise of relief. It was quieter, steadier, filled with moments of rebuilding myself in small ways. I went back to school part-time, took long walks in the park where no one knew my story, and started to rediscover the parts of me that had been swallowed by her chaos. My parents and I found a new rhythm, though it was jagged and imperfect. My mom still visited her, carrying home cooked meals and soft words through the glass divider, while my dad refused to speak her name. And me? I chose distance. Not out of hate, but out of necessity. Because healing requires space, and survival requires choosing yourself even when it feels like abandonment. There were nights I lay awake replaying everything, the metallic click of her gun, the way her voice broke, when she said don't come back, the silence of the house as I walked out alone. But those memories no longer had the power to paralyze me. They became markers of what I had survived, proof that even in the darkest corner of family betrayal, I had managed to carve a path back to myself. I learned something in all of this. Something I carry with me now like a shield. Love without boundaries is not love. It is captivity. My sister wanted me bound to her secrets, chained to her destruction, complicit in her downfall. And when I broke free, when I chose truth over silence, she tried to erase me with fear. But fear is temporary. Boundaries are forever. So when people ask me if I still consider her my sister, I say this: she is the girl I grew up with, the woman who broke my trust, and the reason I will never again sacrifice myself to save someone determined to drown. She is part of my past, not my present, and certainly not my future. My revenge wasn't the sentence the judge gave her. It wasn't even the 7 years she'll spend behind bars. My revenge was simpler, quieter, sharper. It was reclaiming my own life, standing in that courtroom and telling the truth without shaking and walking out into the sunlight free of her shadow. And now, every morning when I wake in my small apartment, sunlight spilling through the curtains onto my second hand, couch, and my cluttered desk, I smile, because I am still here. I survived her gun, her debts, her betrayal. I survived the night she tried to erase me. And in surviving, I took back everything she tried to take from me: my voice, my safety, my future. That is my revenge, and it is enough. Did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are some stories you'll never believe until you hear them told. This story was created and written by me, the author of this channel, Revenge with Sarah. If you felt the weight of this journey, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here, and I'd love to hear it.